Hey everybody, this is Ben. I haven't been able to figure out how to get get Facebook Live to work for me without on my computer tonight. For some reason, hey Matt, I can see you. Some reason the new update of Facebook is not doing the Facebook Lives really easily. So I don't know why it's not working on my computer. So I'm just going to try to do it via phone. I don't know if this will work or not. And we'll see how it goes. Matt, thank you so much for recognizing my shirt tag. It's obviously a Ask Me Anything Facebook Live is what I promised you all. And so it is Ask Me Anything, and we can talk about any topics you want. I'm just home, went down to Virginia Beach on Wednesday to go on a radio show and sort of call a few people out. And you all know that I always love to go on these things and call a few people out that need to be called out. And so there was just a group of Republicans from Virginia Beach that were all going on this radio show together, a number of which have been, just complete jackasses during this whole thing. And so I decided to go down to Virginia Beach and go crash their radio show, and I did. And it was awesome. They were all totally not sure what to do when I showed up in Virginia Beach. No one was expecting that. And I decided to stay for one extra night, so I was actually there for 2 nights. I stayed the night before and the night after. And I don't know how it will be for Memorial Day weekend, but for me at least, when I went down to Virginia Beach, it was fantastic. There was I think they said 8 rooms in a 280-room hotel were occupied. So, I think I was able to social distance by being on my own floor. So wasn't any worry about that. And so that was great. I had a great time at the beach, and now I'm back and got my social distancing in. So, and got to harass a few Republicans in Virginia Beach. So I call that a win-win-win. So, Torres says, any thoughts on the June elections? I don't think there's going to be any super exciting things going on in June. We'll see. But I am here tonight to sort of do an Ask Me Anything. You all can ask me any topics you want to ask about. I can talk about anything from national to local. One of the things I was recently doing an interview, and the topic was the national election in 2016 and what's going to happen with Trump and Biden and everybody wants to get a prediction now of what's going to happen as if any of us have any idea what's going to happen next week. The expectation is that somehow people can make a prediction about this November when we can't figure out what's going to happen next week. But I started thinking about it a little bit, and because the way that it was framed up on this particular show where I was appearing was, a lot of people don't even know the basics of an election or how it's, obviously, Nate Silver helped make it well known that, the 538 number of electoral votes takes 270 votes to win. Any political nerd can tell you that you go to 270 to win as a website and go through and make your own maps on there. But the vast majority of people don't really remember those numbers. And so I was thinking about, how to better explain this that people can really understand the dynamic of what drives a national election, right? And I came up with something. I'd like to run it by people, and you tell me if you all think this makes it, is a better, easier way to explain for people just tuning in for the first time, but also those who sort of need a little bit of a refresher of not only how the election works, but why it works in that way, why it's sort of going and happens the way that it happens. So here's my sort of 101 explanation, and everybody can tell me if you think this is a good one or a bad one. I got some time to think about in the car ride back from Virginia Beach. So there's basically 3 mega cities in the United States that when I say mega cities, they are humongous cities that, overwhelmingly, them and their suburbs, control a single state. And so those three megacities are the three biggest cities in the country: New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. And for those of you if you're on your computer and you want to follow along with this a little bit, or actually go to 270towin.com and you can pull up an electoral map there and make it blank, and you can sort of see how this all plays out. So in those three mega cities, because they're in states that are humongous, the cities are huge, and the cities and their suburbs sort of dominate the states that they're in. And obviously those three cities are and the areas around them dominate those three states politically. They add up to about 104 electoral votes. Now, again, you need 270 to win. So just for a second, think of it just call it an even 100. It's 104 right now, but some of them are declining in population. By the next election, they may be 100 exactly. But, it's 104 right now. But think of it as there's your first block of 100 electoral votes that a Democratic presidential candidate gets. It's basically from three cities in the states that they dominate. And you immediately start with a floor. You're over 100 electoral votes. And again, it only takes 270 to win. So, you're off and running right off the top as a Democratic candidate. And then you take the next group of states, which are the states that have really large cities in them that dominate because of the size of their state. So they're not like the mega cities, but within their states, they are the primary drivers of the elections. And so think of it like Seattle and Washington with 12 electoral votes. Portland in Oregon, it represents about Portland and suburbs, about half the population of Oregon. It's got 7 electoral votes. You've got Las Vegas in Nevada with 6 electoral votes. You've got Denver in Colorado with 9 electoral votes. See, these cities, and we're just talking about cities here that are in a state and they sort of dominate that state in terms of them and their suburbs, are overwhelming in the population. And then think about the other states that are around New York, whether it be Connecticut and New Jersey, both of which have a lot of population out of New York. And then you get Boston and how it dominates the state of Massachusetts, and you start putting these things all on a map in the cities that sort of dominate the states, and you get about another 100 electoral votes. So the three big cities give you 100. And then all the other suburbs and cities that are around places that dominate a single state give you another 100 electoral votes. And the reason that's where the Democrats get all their votes from is because the Democratic Party has become an urbanized party. The Democratic Party used to be 20, 30 years ago was an urban-rural coalition party against the upper-income suburbs. Now the Democratic Party is very much a urban party that's driven out of an urban-suburban coalition, and you see that in last year's congressional elections where, when we took back the House of Representatives, it wasn't in the seats Democrats held the last time they controlled it or 2 times ago when they controlled it. It was in a lot of seats they had never held because the coalition has changed so much that those seats that Democrats had held and lost, they didn't win back. They were winning seats they've never held before in rich suburban enclaves all over the country. And that's because the suburbs have become more and more voting more and more like urban areas because of education levels, income, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So so because of that, once you have a urban-suburban coalition instead of an urban-rural coalition, the mega cities really drive in a state how a state votes. And so, again, the three sort of biggest cities in the country drive almost 100, a little bit over 100 electoral votes to Democrats. Then the cities that dominate a state like Seattle, Las Vegas, Portland, Denver, the New York suburbs in New Jersey and Connecticut, and Boston, they give you about another 100 electoral votes, right? And that is basically, that's sort of the Democratic floor now, is those 200 electoral votes. And when you look on a map and you sort of put just those states on a map, there's not a whole lot else that Hillary Clinton won in 2016. There are some little special exception places. There's, a state like Hawaii that Obviously, you could call Honolulu a mega city because it's large within the state of Hawaii, but that's not really what's driving it. It's a large population there that's not in other states, in terms of a large Asian population that's been solidly Democratic for 50 years. You've got New Mexico with a large Latino population. You've got just the ancient history up in Vermont of always being a Republican state, but it's a progressive state. Places like that where there's little exceptions to this. But for the most part, those 200 electoral votes, that's basically what Hillary Clinton got. And then what was she able to build off of from there? Well, that's where states like Virginia start coming into play. So where Virginia had been on the line of 270 before, now because of that population around Northern Virginia that's suburban, and then you put the two cities in two major cities in the state, in Richmond and Norfolk, and the suburbs around them, in Hampton Roads and in the central Virginia. And that's the coalition that brings Virginia to the table. And then again, you look on the map, and that's about it. The Democrats pick up an electoral vote in Maine because of Portland. Portland's enough of the vote that it tips the state of Maine, even though rural Maine has become Republican to the Democrats. That's two more. New Hampshire's and narrowly, the Boston suburbs, again, is what drives the New Hampshire vote. Some of the Boston suburbs really spread out all the way. There's people that commute in from way out. So that's it. That's the whole Democratic coalition. And so what are the competitive states that, the Democrats don't win? Well, it's places where there's a decent-sized urban population, but it's not large enough within the state as a whole. One of the problems that, so Detroit, for example, Detroit and its suburbs don't dominate the state of Michigan the way that Seattle and its suburbs dominate the state of Washington. That's why that state's become competitive. Milwaukee and Madison are not large enough to sort of dominate the discourse in Wisconsin. And so as the Democrats fall off on that rural vote, and remember in Minnesota, which narrowly went for Hillary, that a state like Minnesota, is the Democratic Party is actually called the Democratic Farm Labor Party. Farm labor being literal for what that coalition was in Minnesota for so many years, of being an urban-rural coalition. And so obviously the politics has changed there. Rural Minnesota is now turning red as well. And the Democratic Farm Labor Party isn't winning, farmers anymore. So because of that, and because the party sort of urbanized into that, so you have a state like Pennsylvania. And what's the biggest problem the Democrats have towards carrying Pennsylvania? And it's twofold. It's got two major cities on either side of the state. And as James Carville once famously said, Pennsylvania is Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Alabama in between. But in those two cities, a big chunk of the Philadelphia suburban population is in the state of Pennsylvania. It gets wasted in the state of New Jersey and in the state of Delaware. So what you're left with, and by the way, on my list of states that are blue, I forgot to mention Baltimore and D.C. sort of dominating, Maryland, which is an obvious one. So what you're left with is this, Philadelphia vote that isn't really large enough to carry the state, because a big chunk of it, if the Philadelphia suburbs were in the state of Pennsylvania entirely, the way that all of Denver, say for example, is in Colorado, or all of Seattle's in Washington, Pennsylvania would still easily be a blue state. It would have been a blue state in 2016. But you lose those suburbs to New Jersey. Philadelphia as its whole is not large enough. Rural Pennsylvania has gotten much more Republican over time than it has been, for the last 40 years. It's another area where, the party's falling behind. And all of a sudden, the math flips, and the only other thing you have left is Pittsburgh, which just isn't a large enough city to tip the balance. And so the state narrowly falls away. Same idea as like going on in Michigan. Now, what you also see at the same time is, where do you see the new states that are coming on the map for the Democrats? Well, it's in historically Republican states that fit this mold. What are the big three? Georgia, number one, because Atlanta and its suburbs, entirely in the state of Georgia, now becoming more and more dominant in the state of Georgia, so that you can potentially carry a state like that driven out of Atlanta. Stacey Abrams almost elected governor of Georgia by carrying Atlanta and its suburbs in a landslide. Texas, the fourth and fifth largest cities in the country, both in the state of Texas. And even with that rock red Republican West in Texas, the growing vote in Houston and Dallas and their suburbs is driving Texas towards being competitive. If it's not blue this year, it could be blue in 4 years. It's getting competitive really quickly because, again, that's the direction, the urbanization of where the party's going. And then the third state, Arizona, Maricopa County, over half of the vote in Arizona. And what's happened is the state of Arizona is red to blue. It went blue in 2018. It's probably going to go blue this year in 2020 for the first time presidential level. And frankly, I think Arizona's headed in the direction that Virginia's headed in, where 8 years from now, after it turns blue the first time, it won't even be a competitive state anymore. So that's the sort of the math. And all these other places have gone off the map for the Democratic Party because there's not enough of an urban core in the states. Obviously Florida has these weird politics, but and some urban, rural, whatever. But you just don't have a party anymore that can compete in places like Missouri, which was a quintessential swing state for so long, is not on the map anymore. Iowa, which was always a blue-leaning state, is now pretty solidly red. You have a state like Indiana, which Democrats could be, nominally competitive in, are now is really totally off the map. You see Wisconsin slipping away. You see Minnesota becoming a problem. You see Ohio not really on the map anymore. And even with Ohio's three cities, Cincinnati is just not a very large urban core. It doesn't have a large suburbs. Cleveland is what drives the vote in the state of Ohio, but it's not big enough to overcome. And Columbus, again, is like a large college town. It's a good vote, but it's not the type of vote you need to be able to carry the state. And there's just too much of everything else, and that's why Ohio is really not even on the map this year. So, when you look at what's our future, what's the political makeup look like in 4, 8, 12 years. Democrats are really becoming confined to cities and suburbs. And so if you're in a state that the city and suburban vote is not able to mathematically dominate the state, then, that state's going to be red. And if you are in a state where the population center is around a large city, the state's going to be blue. And again, what's changed about that versus, a long history where the Democratic Party was very much, from the 1960s on, urban/rural party, is that it takes a lot more states that used to be on the board and takes them off the board. So, what's my prediction for this year? I think Joe Biden's going to win. But I think that, in the Electoral College, it's going to be a lot tighter than people want it to be because there's not a lot of places to go. And so, at the end of the day, do I think he will prevail? I think that there's probably enough of a Biden vote to sneak across the line in Pennsylvania and Michigan. That gets you within one. I don't see any blue states from 2016 flipping out besides maybe Minnesota, but I think Biden will be okay there. That one, the long-term, Minnesota's headed the wrong direction in terms of its trends long-term. And so, will he be able to find one more electoral vote from there or two more electoral votes? Sure. I think he'll win one of the other states. He might be able to get North Carolina, might be able to get Florida, could be able to get Georgia. Arizona is the one that I think is people are the most optimistic about. But Biden's not going to be winning a 350, 400 vote electoral college majority. This is going to be tight because the Democratic Party just isn't competitive in enough places right now to even take advantage of a blowout election. I think there's probably 20 states that are entirely off the board. In the history of the party, there might have been, I'm thinking 20 years ago, 5 states that you would say, that could never, ever vote for a Democratic candidate. I mean, think like Clinton in 92. I think he carried 38 states, but he was competitive in so many they didn't win. So, there was only a small handful that, he wasn't really on the board in. In 92, he almost won Mississippi, for example. Now there's so many states where you may not even get 40% of the vote, that makes the math so much more difficult. And I think the scary piece of this is, as I sort of watch it, is if you are thinking, towards forward 4, 8, 12 years, and Donald Trump is no longer president, and we no longer have this really angry, mobilized, upper-income suburban vote that wants to stop what the Republicans are doing, and say they have some sort of, more reasonable figure that isn't pissing people off every day, like a, call it, you could think of a whole host of examples, but think like a Marco Rubio type who's a conservative president, but just isn't pissing everybody off every day. And if the Republicans are able to make some inroads back into the suburbs by not, pissing everyone off all the time, the math for the Democratic Party long term is actually really difficult. And I remember there was a book written about this a few years ago about how there was this coalition that was coming, and it was going to be unbeatable going forward, that the National Democratic Party was going to be a lock on the Electoral College for 20 or 30 years. And we see how fast that has blown up. And the reason it's blown up is everything that was in that book was correct about the emerging populations in a number of key states like Texas that eventually were going to turn the states blue. But what it didn't account for was that these places where, Democrats would get 40% of the vote regularly suddenly became 25 and 20. Dave Wasserman made a point a few weeks ago on social media doing analysis of Pennsylvania that there were something like 250,000 people, I think, that are left in the state of Pennsylvania outside of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and sort of their urban and the suburbs around them that voted Democratic last election. And his point was that if you think that that vote is a base vote, that as the polls are sort of shifting here, and I'm talking about polls like North-South poll, not polls like polling data, but as things are shifting in politics underneath us, if you thought that those 250,000 votes are guaranteed to stay with us, that's the vote that's declining every election. So in that respect, Pennsylvania actually gets further away from us every election, and it's only because of the fact that the suburbs around Philadelphia are so populous that the state probably will go blue this year for Joe Biden. But over the next, say, when we talk about 2028 or something, Pennsylvania is, long-term in an even environment, very likely to be a red state until Pittsburgh, is growing at a rate that allows it to also become a force that's closer to Philadelphia's force in the state. There's too much rural vote in that state. There's too many small towns that are voting too overwhelmingly Republican to keep up with. And if you have 250,000 votes that are still on the board for us, every time that you lose another 10, 20,000 of those each cycle, it just gets worse and worse and worse for the party. And that's the direction they're going. And I think every cycle when people see the numbers fall, they think well, that's our base vote. That's not going to go away. And we've seen that in a place like Southwest Virginia, where every cycle, as it got worse and worse and worse, everyone said, no, we've hit the bottom. It can't get any worse than this. This is a historically Democratic area. Now we're down to 40%, but that's our solid base. And then the next election, it falls to 32, and people say, okay, well, we can never possibly do worse than a third of the vote there. So we've held our base vote. And then the next election, it goes to 26 and 21. It can drop very far, and you can lose some of these areas now 75-25, 80-20 that are historically blue areas. And it changes the math out on people really, really quickly. So that's my take on sort of the presidential election. I think, because of who Trump is and because of what we're facing, I feel like Joe Biden's going to win. But long term, I think this electoral college is actually going to get harder and harder for Democrats. I think when we look at the direction we're going in by 2024, you might need to see a Democratic candidate win the popular vote by probably 5 points nationally in order to win the electoral college. This election cycle is probably closer to maybe 4 points. Remember that Hillary won by 3 points and was close. But it's possible that it could get worse than that. And if you continue to see this urban, urban has always been solidly Democratic, but the suburban ring around it becoming bluer while rural areas continue to get redder every cycle, the Electoral College is going to get further and further away from Democrats until Texas hits its breaking point. And now I know I've got a couple comments I've had on here, and then on my shirt being backwards. The shirt is on intentionally backwards. I'm on day 2 of wearing it, and so I just thought I would put it on backwards today. So for everyone who's out there watching, just know like this is how I roll. Deal with it. So anyway, this isn't Ask Me Anything, so I'm on here if anybody wants to ask me any questions about something else, but those are my thoughts for the night. And, like I said, had a lot of fun in Virginia Beach down there to harass people on Wednesday. I desperately do need a haircut, as you all can see. It's gotten just completely out of control. And it's frankly gotten really bad, and I've got it sort of off to the side. You can see how far down it is now. Like if I want to, it's really, really bad. And I'm hoping that go see a barber sometime soon. I know they're going to be opening in Northern Virginia in like a week, but I'm going to guess the first few weeks of that are going to be really crazy. So I'm going to continue to look like a homeless man, and that's okay. I'm ready for that. What other questions do people have? I see a lot of you are watching, and so tell me what you want me to talk about. What other things were interesting? Leslie, I don't totally understand that question. So, what other things should we talk about? I could give a little rant on today. I got a update from, I'm on this text chain thing that you can sign up for from Fairfax County for the COVID updates. And got an update from Fairfax that we were the biggest single day yet, over 400 people tested positive. And then they had a little note on there because they're trying not to alarm people. And it says, well, here's the reason why so many people are testing positive, which they've never included on this update up for the first 2 months of it. And the reason why was that the testing centers released the numbers inconsistently, and so the daily numbers are not always accurate. You should be looking at a 7-day average, which is what we all were talking about on these Facebook Lives a month and a half ago, when it was really obvious that was going on, and they've never said that until today. They never admitted it. But it's been like super obvious the whole time that's what was happening, that the daily updates were completely skewed for certain days of the week when things would be released, and that you couldn't really trust the daily updates. You had to look at like it over a course of, they're saying a week. A week's fine. Over a course of a week, it is trending a little bit downward. But it's not, when you talk about 400 new cases released today, this is still spreading in Northern Virginia, where I am. And I think people need to be really, really careful. I encourage everyone out there who's watching this or spread the word, to be careful. That's really why I decided to go down to Virginia Beach and get on that show this week was, there was these Republicans on the show that were just spreading misinformation about how safe it was and that this, it's fine to go out, reopen. This is not true. It's not safe. It's okay to start to reopen. I do think that part of reopening is people need to figure out like what works and what doesn't. But this thing is still spreading. It's still very serious, and people should take it seriously. Now, Election Day was this week in local cities. The turnout was low in person. Lots of people voted by mail. That's good. We'll wait and see. It takes a couple weeks to find out, if something happened where anyone got sick from it. So we don't know the answer to that yet. I personally don't think they should have gone forward with those local elections, but all the local officials really wanted to push it forward so they would, so they could, go win their elections. Michael Grotman says, "Do you think the governor and General Assembly will go to mail-in ballots?" Well, sort of. I mean, anyone can mail a request form. So, Michael, to your question, I think third-party groups are going to send out request forms to all voters when we talk about presidential election this fall. And so in Virginia now, because of COVID, you can, I forget which reason it is, it might be 2A, But one of the reasons that's on the absentee ballot application, you can pick automatically because of COVID if you're concerned about it. So I think what will happen is, my guess is that these third-party groups will send out absentee ballot request forms to every voter. It will already have pre-checked the reason that is allowed to be automatic right now, which is the COVID reason. I think, again, 2A, I'm not positive about that. And people will be able to mail that in. Probably, I'm going to guess the third-party groups probably will make it postage prepaid, where they'll pay for the postage if people mail that in. And when that has happened in other states, you've seen an explosion in vote by mail. So I expect when those go out that you will see a lot of people apply to vote by mail. So do I think that the governor will make it mandatory vote by mail? No, but I do think you're going to see a massive vote by mail. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see half of Virginia voting vote by mail this year, which normally we're like a 5 to 10% absentee state. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see it get up closer to 50. And vote by mail changes a lot of things about an election. One of the things that vote by mail really changes and causes to go around is that, the election's over early. They're having a primary right now in the 2nd District down the Virginia Beach area to run against Elaine Luria. There's 3 Republican candidates, and one of them was on the show with me on Wednesday. And Scott Taylor, is the former congressman. And I think Scott's going to win his primary. And he's sort of like sitting in limbo right now and going to be sitting for the next month because most people that are going to vote have already voted. They've sent in their absentee ballots. He's probably already won the election, but they don't count those absentee ballots until Election Day. And Election Day is not till the 4th week in June. And so he's just sort of sitting there in limbo for a month, not able to do anything. And I think that is going to be what you see in other places where when you have, an election that's early, it's really already decided. If you had mail-in ballots in 2016 the way that you're going to have in 2020, and the same people voted that voted, Hillary probably would have won because she lost a lot of voters right at the end when all that Comey shit happened, and they would already have cast their ballots. She was well ahead in the polling 3 weeks out from the election, 4 weeks out from the election. It tightened as you got closer to Election Day. So when you do vote by mail and a big chunk of the electorate votes early, it can change how a campaign works and the way we think about Election Day as sort of, you're building up to Election Day. It's very different in vote by mail. Courtney asks, who's going to win Virginia Gov in 2021? Courtney, I'm going to say that, it's not going to be Amanda Chase. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Amanda Chase win the Republican nomination. And if so, the Democrats should be able to win that election regardless of what happens in the presidential this year. But if you do see Joe Biden win the presidency and the Republicans come up with a halfway decent candidate, 2021 is going to be a lot tougher than other recent statewide elections have been for us in Virginia. It's going to be a real battle when you get the Republicans energized at the Democratic president. I've got a question on text asking, should Governor Northam require face masks? And I have mixed feelings about this. I think, most of the edicts that Governor Northam has been putting out aren't being followed anyway. People, the police are not enforcing them as aggressively as they should be in localities, especially in more conservative localities. So I'm not sure if the governor puts out an edict that you must wear face masks that actually will increase the face mask wearing. And so I sort of go as a toss-up on this because it would be nice if there was some way to make more people wear face masks. But I'm not sure that an order from Governor Northam is the way to get people to do that or to comply. So again, this is a Ask Me Anything for those of you who want to type in a question. Feel free. I am, David Crane said, Mary, Shag, Kill, Scott Taylor, Jay Jones, the Cooch. All right. All right. The problem is, David, with that, the Cooch is now a federal official. So I don't think that you can really name him in that without the FBI knocking on your door if you put him in any of those one category in particular there. So I'm going to go with that's not. I'm not gonna be able to answer that question, but give me one that's not doesn't have like isn't gonna get me an FBI visit, and I'll think about it. So what else is going on? Otherwise, I went down to the beach this week. That was my excitement. Not a whole lot else is happening. We're doing a lot of okay. Scott Taylor, John Frederick, Jay Jones. Ooh, all right. I think I'm going to marry John Fredericks on that. Let's see. So I got to it's Shag or kill Jay Jones or Scott Taylor. I'm maybe partisan on this, so I'll go with we're going to kill off Scott Taylor, Shag Jay Jones, and marry John Frederick. So there, I gave you David. You got what you wanted there. Colin said Vienna going Republican. A lot of places went Republican this week in the local elections. Stanton went Republican. Some of the city elections in Tidewater that were contested went Republican. One of the things that people don't realize, they always, there's been this sort of talk about vote by mail is like so democratic, and you win so Democrats do better when there's higher turnout, and people have actually started to really believe that, and it's not entirely true. Democrats do better when there's higher turnout amongst younger voters and their core constituencies. But in terms of vote by mail, the reason Republicans do so well in mail ballots, and in California they actually break it out separately, and you can see on there on election night that the earliest mail votes that come in every election in districts are heavily Republican comparatively to how the district ends up. Republican voters are older, and on average, and so they're much better about filling out a form correctly. They get something in the mail, they check their mail every day, they fill it out, they return it, it comes back in. And we saw that in the special election for Congress that just went on in California a couple weeks ago that the Republicans picked up. We see it in the local elections that have gone on this week in Virginia, where Brian Graham says absentee by mail is also heavily white. Absolutely true. And again, I think that's driven by the fact it's old. And the senior population is not reflective of what the rest of the population in the country looks like whatsoever. And so, vote by mail is actually like really good for Republicans. And I think that people assume it's not because Trump has done so much bashing of it. And, there's sort of this mantra in everyone's mind that higher turnout automatically means it's good for the Democrats. Not always true. And Brian says we need to find a new, more flattering angle for your live stream. Okay, so let me explain that really quickly. My computer, for whatever reason, was saying tonight the Facebook Live wouldn't work. So I'm actually doing this from my phone. My hand is actually falling asleep holding it up like this. That has been my, that's why I'm having such a bad angle tonight. And, and frankly, I don't really care if y'all don't think I look good on this, I don't care. See, I'm wearing a shirt that's on backwards anyway, so that shows you all how much I care about what you think about how I look like tonight. I mean, look at my hair. I mean, I've got plenty of things that are not going for me at all right now, besides just the angle on this video. Brendan says, next likely California House seat that could flip back to GOP. There's a couple that I think could flip back this November, depending on how the overall the results go. My gut says that in California we end up maintaining them all because I think Biden will end up turning out enough people to win some of these marginal seats. But like Brennan, think of the Orange County seats we all picked up in the last election, and they all very much mirror sort of Katie Hill's seat of being those upper income Republican voters that are voting Democratic right now to stop Trump. I think if you had a special election in almost any of those seats in Orange County that we picked up in 2018, the same way that you'd had a special election in California 25, almost any of them could have flipped away from us in a special election. And a good example of this in 2018, there was actually a special election in Orange County, which we picked up, where we picked up 5 House seats in the spring to recall a Democratic state senator who had voted for a gas tax increase. And the Republican candidate, they were successfully recalled him, and the Republican candidate, I think, won by 18 points or whatnot. And that was 6 months before the Democrats swept the entire county in the November election for Congress, which tells you 2 things. One is that they're viewing the state elections there very differently than the federal, and 2, that the turnout in a special is just so overwhelmingly bias towards Republicans because special election turnout that's later biases itself towards senior citizens, and senior citizens are just overwhelmingly Republican right now. Andrew asked for the most vulnerable Dem and GOP seat in the country. I'm going to go with, so for the Senate, the most vulnerable Republican seat is definitely in Arizona. I don't think that McSally is going to stay within even 10 points there by the time the election's over. And the most vulnerable Democratic seat's obvious in Alabama with Doug Jones. Matt says Virginia AG 2021, LG 2021. Who wins Virginia 5? Okay, so when we talk about Virginia AG 2021, I think Jay Jones just announced for Attorney General, and he's a state delegate from Norfolk. My gut says on that, and we'll see. I could be wrong about this. My gut says is that Jay is running for Attorney General because there are a lot of people encouraging him to try to block Mark Herring from being able to drop back. Mark obviously early announced for governor. Then he had his whole brown makeup scandal. Then, you've had all these other state legislators announcing for governor. And I think that the general consensus was Mark Herring's likely to drop back and run for re-election as Attorney General. So I think that Jay Jones got in early to try to sort of block that path for him to be able to come back and try to run for Attorney General. Will that be successful? Obviously Jay has extremely low name ID around the state. I think it would be tough for him to stop Mark Herring from dropping back, but he does provide a real disincentive, especially after all the incidents that we had happened last year with the governor and the attorney general and lieutenant governor, that facing a state legislator in a primary who doesn't have all that baggage, even though he has very low name ID, is a dangerous place to be for Mark Herring. And I know that Jay Jones is probably looking at this, taking the 2013 results for Attorney General, when Justin Fairfax was pretty much an unknown around the state and scored 49% of the vote in a primary against Mark Herring for Attorney General. And I think Jay probably thinks he'll do well in a lot of the same areas. And obviously he does not have some of the baggage that Justin had. So, there's a decent chance that he could be the nominee. We'll see who else wants to run. We'll see if Herring drops back. But I do think that he has pathways to be the nominee. Charlie says, I hear Shannon Taylor's considering it. I don't think Shannon Taylor would be a good candidate for that. I would say that publicly right off the top. I don't think that she has been a very quality prosecutor in Henrico. From what I have seen and heard from people down there, there have been a lot of issues, I think, that have gone on in Henrico County that would not make people feel like Shannon Taylor would be a great candidate to run for any higher office. Maybe she shouldn't even be running for re-election. That may need to be an open seat sometimes. So I do not think Shannon Taylor will be a good candidate. I would actually love to see Charlie, the new Connell Sterney in Richmond, Donald McEachin's wife, Colette, consider running statewide in the future. Donald ran himself for AG in 2001, was not successful. Colette has gotten a really good reputation as Commonwealth's attorney in Richmond so far. People are saying lots of good things about her. And maybe she'll decide to, now that she's in politics, to try to move up and run for higher office. I think she'd be a very good candidate. Matt also asked about, Lieutenant Governor. I think that's going to be sort of a fallback primary. I think, we haven't seen everyone announcing yet. I don't have a lot of analysis around that, but I wouldn't be surprised at all to see some of the people running for governor fall back and end up running for lieutenant governor in that field. And then, of course, Paul Goldman did announce, which, for those of you who don't know Paul Goldman, it's going to be great. Paul is such a good guy. I'm not saying I'm going to vote for him because I'm not sure if he's going to be like a serious candidate or not. Or even if he is a serious candidate, I can't promise I'll vote for him yet. But I like Paul Goldman a lot as a person. He's entertaining. He's funny. He's got great stories of past elections. And so I think he's going to make for really interesting debates when we have all the statewide candidates running and Paul Goldman shows up. You never know what's going to come out of Paul Goldman's mouth. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So I am really glad to see him taking a shot at it. What other things do you all want me to comment on? I think you asked about the 5th District. So the Republicans are having this convention in, was it a week or 2 weeks? A lot of people think that Jesse asked, why did you never run for office? Jesse did run once, really briefly for the House of Delegates, had a great time doing it, knocked on a lot of doors. My campaign lasted, I think, about a month, maybe a month and a week. I raised $10,000 in about a month, which in 2005 numbers was a pretty good haul for a 1 month campaign. But just discovered that it was like not for me, and I haven't run for anything since, and probably never will again. Ryan Cunningham said, lots of angst on Twitter tonight over Klobuchar. Do you really think it matters who the VP pick is? Ryan, I don't think the VP pick matters at all. I don't think Tim Kaine was relevant to the 2016 result. I don't think it matters who Joe Biden picks in 2020. I do think the Democratic Party has become a group of constituency groups instead of a larger, broader party. And so every constituency group is now pounding the table, demanding that you have somebody that represents them be on the ticket. And, diversity is fantastic when you have a lot of slots for things. If you want to build a diverse cabinet, you can find a lot of diversity to put places to be able to find, different check these boxes of you need a veteran, you need someone who's gay, you need an African-American, you need a Latino, you need women, you need all. It's easy to do in a cabinet. It's not possible to do that with one pick. No matter who Joe Biden picks, that adds diversity to the ticket, he's going to piss off some other group of diversity that wanted a different type of diversity on the ticket. So, I personally don't really like these wars that go on of like Joe Biden has to do this, he has to do that. I think he made a little bit of a mistake saying it had to be a woman, he would pick a woman. I think he should be messaging it as he picked a woman running mate because she was the best person to pick. He doesn't need to say I picked a woman because I wanted to pick her. Whoever he picks is going to have a big leg up on 2024. And I think that's probably why people are so riled up about the Klobuchar thing. I think Klobuchar would be a fine candidate. So I don't think that, if you go and say that this person can run or can't run, to be his running mate because, they don't fit this bill or they don't fit that bill. Again, you can't, for vice president, please everybody. I personally think, my gut says the VP running mate, I'm going to go on a limb here and make a prediction. My gut says it's going to be Elizabeth Warren. And the reason I think it will be Elizabeth Warren is because of the unique economic crisis we're in right now. That Biden's going to want a running mate that is just an expert on these type of economic issues. And obviously, Elizabeth Warren is exactly that. I think Senator Harris from California is the next closest to being his running mate. So I think it's probably between the two of them as the two front runners. And then you have, other people that are sort of on the outskirts that could emerge. But my gut says it's probably one of the two of them, and wouldn't be surprised at all to see it end up being Elizabeth Warren, just because of the unique sort of economic issues that people are talking about this year. When we talk about the economy, she's someone who can really discuss it in an intelligent way, and I think that Joe Biden's going to want that, given the economic crisis that we're in related to this disease. He's going to want someone who can really intelligently discuss the economy, and so that's why I think it will end up being Elizabeth Warren, would be my guess. So fire out any other questions you have. Courtney asked, Governor, top 3 nominees. Did I miss your commentary on this? Yeah, Courtney, you missed the commentary on Governor. If you go back later, you can see what I had to say about that. What else? For those who are just joining, I was I got the hiccups now. Down in Virginia Beach this week. Went down to crash John Frederick's show. That was exciting. Harassed Scott Taylor. Harassed the state senator down there. What's his name? It's not even really. Gosh, that shows how relevant he is. I have no idea what his name. Oh, DeSteph. And then there was the other state senator just got elected down there. What's her name? Who beat Cheryl Turpin? I can't remember her name now. Again, they're not really that relevant of legislators down in Richmond. She was on the show. And it's always funny when I go down to like either Richmond or Hampton Roads and do one of these things with a radio host, because there's like these Richmond people that come out of the legislature, like a Scott Taylor, who know exactly who I am, and like are either really friendly or not friendly, but like they sort of like know what to expect getting on the air with. And then you have some like random local officials that like don't follow state politics at all and have no idea who I am, or two, why I'm on the air with them, or three, like what to expect from it. And so in that case, this one was Virginia Beach Mayor Bobby Dyer, who clearly had absolutely no idea who I was or why I was on the radio with him, and which made it a lot of fun for me because I was able to poke at him, and he couldn't figure out why he was doing that. Brian says, was that essential travel? I think it was, Brian. It was a radio program that was being aired statewide, and there were 12 people that were going to be on the show to spread misinformation about what was going on with COVID-19. So I felt like a little bit of a hero to go down there and crash it and bring a voice of reason to it, so that people out there knew that some of the things that were being said were complete bullshit and they needed to stay safe. So in that respect, it was essential. And the beach was beautiful. No one was there. Again, there were like 8 rooms occupied in a hotel of 280, I think, or whatever. I had a floor to myself. Highly recommend it. We'll see what happens with Memorial Day traffic, but if it doesn't increase, if you can go to Virginia Beach during the week and be there and not have anyone else around, it's a beautiful place, and I highly recommend it. I actually might go back if that keeps going. Brian says, what's the probability we have football seasons for pro, college, high school? Pro, definitely going to happen. And it's going to happen without a delay. And I think that it probably will be with empty stadiums unless something dramatically changes. But pro football has so much money in television that they can survive with empty stadiums and do very well. In terms of college, college, I think, is a lot more borderline because these university presidents, the athletic directors are going to want to have college football because that's where they make all their money. But they still report to university presidents, and I think they're going to have a lot of problems with academia and people that are in universities going against the opinions of the doctors that work at those universities of whether or not it's safe, and saying, well, we'll make it safe for football. I just think that that's not gonna fly. And the moment that you see a couple of teams starting to opt out, other teams are going to opt out. So I think college is really on the rocks. High school, forget about it. High school football is not happening. I don't think parents are going to let their kids participate in it, even if it started to move forward. And I actually wonder, Brian, in terms of football, because it had become so much less and less popular among young people in terms of playing it. There's many parents out there that won't let their sons play football anymore. Whether or not this COVID thing on top of that is really going to kill a lot of high school football teams, where in smaller high schools, will they be able to field enough players to have a team? I think it certainly will kill a lot of junior varsity teams all over the state, and it may kill football programs entirely because there's just not enough players to play when the parents are going to say, football's dangerous enough to begin with, plus you have COVID and they could spread disease, and I don't see that happening at all. So I think that's out. In terms of basketball, basketball is an interesting sport on this because, the players get so close to each other in basketball so many times. You guard really, really close in basketball. I don't think basketball is coming back anytime soon. I don't think you can safely play an NBA game, a college basketball game, and not potentially spread the disease. I think hockey actually has a chance of coming back a lot sooner than basketball. You have so much protective equipment. If they can adapt that equipment to make it, a little bit less likely that people could, I don't know if you want to put like a mask towards the face, where, on your helmet where like it's blocking in so that, if you cough or spit, that it's not like going out onto the ice. But the environment's going to have to change with that, but I think hockey could come back. And I think that's probably, along with football, the next most likely to, be able to come back this summer. Maybe have a Stanley Cup playoffs over the summer. So we've covered sports, covered politics. I think I've answered everybody's questions. So if anyone else has anything, fire in soon. I can't do this as long as I've done some of the other ones because, again, I'm having to do it on my phone. And so my hand is falling asleep as I'm sitting here talking to you all, holding this up. But I'll keep it going to finish off any other questions that come out. And appreciate all you who have tuned in tonight. What else do we want to cover? For those who joined late, go back and watch the tape. I did a little review of the Electoral College, sort of how I see things breaking out in this year and going forward. Philip asked if you addressed that your shirt looks like it's on backwards. I have addressed that issue. I stand by it. I'm keeping my shirt on backwards. But you can see here, even though the shirt is on backwards, it still doesn't look like it's on backwards. I got my Redskins shirt on. Fight for old DC. Peter says, so no baseball. Baseball seems to me, Peter, like a sport that they could figure out a way to play. Some people have questioned whether baseball is a sport or not. And depending how you feel about that. But baseball does not require people to be up close the way that other sports do. And especially if you could get the umpires out of there and maybe have electronic umpiring with balls and strikes, you could see a way that a lot of baseball teams potentially could play games. So I think baseball is more likely. Hockey, I really do think hockey will be able to come back. And football, it may not come back at college and high school this year, but professionally going to be good. Molly says, what about Biden not being able to campaign? Trump can't have rallies either. I don't know what you mean by Biden not being able to campaign. Biden is having things online. He's doing some amount of campaigning. So I think Biden is campaigning the way he does, but in some ways this benefits him. I don't think Biden ever was going to be the most energetic campaigner that we ever fielded. The idea that Biden is running and doesn't have to go out and do big rallies, I don't think that hurts him in any way. Not like Biden was going to draw 25,000 people rallies anyway. That's not his strength as a candidate. So I think this works fine. So that's all. I think I covered everything. We covered a little bit of local, covered national politics, covered sports, talked about state politics. Molly said media coverage of Biden won't be the same as Trump's. Yeah, it never is. And, Brennan says feasibility of Trump's proposed drive-in rallies. I think the feasibility of it's really good, but I don't know the appearance that it has. I mean, you've got to set that up so it looks good. I guess you could take aerial shots, but it doesn't have the same feeling as a crowd. Everyone going to honk their horn when they like something? I mean, that's going to make it really hard to hear him over. It's one thing if you have a cheering crowd, but people honking their horns, is that going to work? I don't know. We'll see. But if this year turns into drive-in political rallies, it'll certainly be entertaining to watch and see how campaigns are able to do that. So I think anyway, got in everybody's questions tonight. So thank you for joining. I'm gonna try to do these again. If I can ever figure out how to get it on my computer again, that would be great. But I'll try to do these. I promise to try to do them at least once a week, and it's been a few weeks. So we'll try to come back next week. And thank you everyone for joining, and look forward to seeing you all on soon.